Luke was able to pack a lot of training into that period of time. We've also spent 2 years apart from them. We checked in with them a little bit in Book of Boba Fett, but enough time has been spent that you're going to see a significant change in this character because he's no longer the helpless infant that the Mandalorian first encountered.
Hello there.
This is where the fun begins.
A new canon book exploring the timeline of the Star Wars universe is now available for fans to read, but its coverage of the events of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett might confuse some. One of the biggest questions from the fandom regarding continuity is how much time has passed from the moment that Din Djarin passed Grogu off to Luke Skywalker at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2 until the two were once again reunited in the Book of Boba Fett spin-off show. Previously, before producer and creator of the Mandoverse, Jon Favreau, said that it had been between 0 and 2 years since the end of The Mandalorian Season 2, which doesn't make a lot of sense, while also briefly commenting on how it's been more than 1 year. So into the regards of Jon Favreau and kind of depicting on how much time has passed between the different seasons and different shows of the Mandoverse, there's really been a lot of confusion. Saying one thing and then saying another thing. Saying that it's between 0 and 2 years doesn't necessarily make sense for one thing, but then also turning around and saying that it's more than 1 year, then again changing your answer doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, I will say for those of you that have been watching our channel for long enough, I've never believed any of this. I always knew that Jon Favreau had been regarding into the real world time for the most part, and wasn't referring to in-universe. And so for whatever reason, a lot of people took it to heart and really took what he said very serious in a way, and had always said, well, Jon Favreau said it's 2 years between these shows, even though everybody knows that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, because normally these shows will pick up just right off from where we left. With, sure, maybe a couple of weeks to a couple of months in between, give or take. So aside from all of this being said here, we have a new official book entitled Star Wars Timelines that was been released recently, and within its many pages, the events of the Disney Plus's The Mandalorian, not including the recent third season though, however, were recounted in detail. For the events of both Season 1 and Season 2, and also including the Book of Boba Fett's freshman run, the guide labels as all of them as happening within the year 9 ABY, after the Battle of Yavin, saying that all of these shows are taking place pretty much back to back to back. All the seasons are all taking place within the within a year. Which of course makes a whole lot more a heck of a sense there. And exactly as I had mentioned, it feels like maybe a couple of weeks to a couple of months, give or take there, between each season and each show. And so to answer the biggest question is how much time Grogu spent with Luke Skywalker, according to the Timelines book, it had been mere months that had passed between Grogu and Din Djarin's emotional goodbye in the Season 2 finale, and their reunion during the Book of Boba Fett's final battle. However, the show's producer Jon Favreau had previously stated and said that it had been more than a year that the bounty hunter and the child had been apart. Of course, I think that he's for sure just referring that into context of the real world, actually, of between how much time has passed in real time rather than in universe. Jon Favreau's words in the past have directly gone against the idea of it still being 9 ABY, while still managing to be wishy-washy, even trying to squeeze in the claim of between 0 and 2 years to keep all of the options open, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So finally, to have this in-universe and in-canon book here for Star Wars Timelines, it finally is able to clear up that answer officially, that all of the Mandalorian seasons and that the Book of Boba Fett are all taking place within the same year. And confusingly enough, not according to Jon Favreau, is not taking place over the span of a couple of years, between 0 and 2 years, as I had mentioned, doesn't make a lot of sense. And so in this case here, who do you believe, I think, is the question now? It's up in the air. Are you going to believe the show's creator, the Mandoverse creator and producer, Jon Favreau, the one that had came up with this whole original idea, or are you going to believe this in-universe canon, actual book? And I think the proper way to go is to actually believe this in-universe book, Star Wars Timelines. I think is the best answer, because Jon Favreau, loving the pieces, keeps changing his mind, keeps changing his answer on many different occasions. As I had mentioned earlier on, he stated that it's between 0 and 2 years, it's between over a year, it's just always up in the air, and it feels like every other interview that he's asked this kind of question, he always is changing his answer. So when it comes to credibility, I think that it has to go with the Star Wars Timelines. and that originally so that Jon Favreau had been referring to in real-world time passing between the season's releases. Really, my only problem with this, and I think that there's so many other problems with it at the same time, is that one thing that fans have been calling out before is that if there was no sizable gap between the Mandalorian leaving Grogu and then the two getting reunited, then the big moment at the season 2 finale really loses a hefty amount of emotional credibility. And I still think that either way, regarding or disregarding this overall timeline here of it being a few mere couple of months, it still just is something that should have waited for The Mandalorian Season 3 to actually happen, than rather squeezing it into the end of the Book of Boba Fett. It felt out of place and kind of random, and I've discussed it plenty of times here on the channel. And so even then, for the time being, there aren't many events in the time frame of the Mandoverse, of the events that take place after the events of the original trilogy, leading us up to the sequel trilogy in the series, that need to worry about contradicting or acknowledging any of the timelines. However, with Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew right around the corner, it'll soon become much more harder to avoid these sorts of specifics, and it can get a little bit more complicated into the regards of the different timelines and how much time is taking place between each of these shows and each of the seasons. Especially with a big Mandoverse crossover film on the way, things are bound to get a little bit messy, I think. But hopefully so in the future we'll have more updated versions, more volumes of the Star Wars Timelines book, or maybe just kind of more mini timeline books that officialize, or maybe they can put it on their Star Wars website even, I think would be nice, to really help officialize and get the proper idea, get the proper answer that everybody wants to know here into the regards of the Mandoverse, updated as we go on with new shows and everything like that, so they don't have to put out a new book every year or anything like that for Star Wars Timelines. But having our answer now that everything takes place like within the same year, I think creates a whole new perspective of the Mandoverse at that, and it feels less messy, it doesn't feel as confusing anymore, and it makes a lot more sense, and I'm happy with that, honestly. And to see that this has finally been cleared up, I was very, very frustrated before with this whole thing going on with Jon Favreau misspeaking about and kind of changing his answer a whole lot, going back and forth between that it's more than a year, it takes place 0, and the 2 years, it just answers that don't necessarily make sense in my eyes, or really anybody else's probably, and then have people that like overly like heavily believe the claim and like very stick with it, like, oh, it's supposed to be having a couple of years in between each of the seasons, which just doesn't necessarily make sense whatsoever. So to see all that is very frustrating, but then to see that this book came out here, clears it all up, is very satisfying in a way. So let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. I would love to hear what you guys are all thinking here. And of course, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching today's video. This has been Unofficial Star Wars. Have a great one, guys. Peace out.